Hello, and welcome to another episode of Killing the Church. Now, unfortunately, as you see, it is just me tonight. So we're doing Seamus does a rant, as a last-minute change to the normal for the night. So it'll be a short episode, which is fine. Sometimes short is good. Gettysburg Address being a good example. And so for those of you wondering where my compatriot is, where Brad is, not quite at liberty to discuss that, but I will say please keep him in your prayers. There's a good reason he's not able to make it tonight, so please pray for him. The details are unimportant. God will hear it either way. So we appreciate all of your guys's support and your prayers. So yes, tux for a rant. I decided to wear a bow tie today because bow ties are cool. And it's a matching blue, matches the vest and everything. And I saw it and I was like, I'm gonna put it on. Why not? So first and foremost, thank you to our top tier Patreon supporters. We got a couple of new names up on the board here today. So just wanted to point out that things are updating. So thank you once again for all of your generous support. We really appreciate it. Also, some of you might realize that is a different logo. It's slightly different. I'm not sure if you can totally tell how different it is, but it is a different logo. And so we're throwing this one up as we progress. That logo will be the new logo as we move forward, and we're still doing some updates, but that's the one. So thank you very much again for all of your guys' support. And let's get some background music. There we go. How's that sound? And I don't like doing this thing because it's just me, no background. I really don't like that. It feels off. Let me get the logo in the corner going. It's still the old logo, funny enough. So anyway, before I begin, as is still the tradition, I have here for myself, this is a Highlands single malt called the Dafiomi. I'm not sure if you can see. Man, it's bright lights. There we go. Nope, can't really. Too shiny. Far too shiny. There we go. That's better. The Dafiomi 15-year. I'm gonna try this one. It's been a while since I've had this one. It's been sort of sitting for a little bit, so let's see how it goes. I usually go for like a 12-year, so 15 is odd, but give it a shot. And let's see. For those of you joining us, feel free, because this is a very last-minute thing and not a whole lot ready for this particular episode. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat and we'll talk about them. And this will probably be, like I said, a little short episode. I just got a couple of things to say about the hate that the Talmud tends to get. And so once I've said my piece, I've done my rant, then we'll throw it to the audience and you guys can put me in the lion's den. And in the meantime, tell me what you're drinking, if you're drinking, and if you have any recommendations. So this is the Dafiomi 15. Very light on the nose, very pretty. Actually, I'm looking forward to this. That's excellent. Very dark, though. It's smoky. The aftertaste is very smoky. And I don't usually like smoky scotch. So I'll be very slow on that one tonight. But peanut butter. I mean, okay. All right. So, someone's got a Dalmore. I love the Dalmore, by the way. One of my favorites. Broke out the Dalmore. I'm sorry that you didn't get your Trinity episode part 5. But there's a few things that we were going to handle a few verses. Not a whole lot that I can do by myself. It was actually primarily going to be a Brad focused episode. He's got a lot prepared for the particular verses that we were going to do. So you're stuck with me doing a Talmud rant on the idea of anti-Talmudism that I see a lot growing in growing, that I see a lot common in both Christian and Messianic circles, primarily in like the Hebrew roots, where the Talmud is sort of seen as like this thing that was composed and written by the devil himself. And it's incredibly racist and whatever. Like, these are all the claims about the Talmud, and everything in the Talmud is just ultra legalistic, totally useless. Don't worry about it. And there's no sense in reading it. And that's typically what we hear from Talmud haters. And I want to clear the air on this thing. When it comes to the Talmud, I don't think people realize just how valuable the Talmud really is. Without the Talmud, you really would actually have a hard time translating the Old Testament in its entirety, or the Tanakh. I prefer not to use the term Old Testament, but for those of you wondering, from now we'll be using the word Tanakh. It's an acronym meaning Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, or Torah, Writings, and Prophets. Torah, Prophets, and Writings, excuse me. So the Christian Old Testament is the Hebrew Tanakh. But much of the Tanakh would be almost untranslatable without the help of outside sources. Much of the Hebrew, the way that the Hebrew language works, it's very, very context dependent. And there are multiple, without vowels, which there are no vowels in the Hebrew language. The Masoretic texts have invented a vowel system, otherwise known as the Nikud. But the Nikud was invented out of the oral traditions, out of the Talmud. The Talmud and the oral traditions helped them make the decisions on how to place the vowels in certain words, because there are many examples in which one word can mean one way, and that same word can mean something completely different, and it will totally change the nature of the text. What's nice about the Talmud is it gives us the context that's very much lacking in some instances on what certain words mean. It's a very extensive piece of work. For those of you who have not heard of a Talmud, it's a 73-volume set of books. At least the Art Scroll edition is 73 volumes, and it's mostly case law. That's another thing too. Is not a lot of people understand that the Talmud is primarily discussions between rabbis over hundreds of years, trying to hash out and debate and discuss and clarify certain things about case law. Much like the United States Constitution has case law to accompany the Constitution itself, case law helps us to better interpret the Constitution as things change over time. And that's about like what the Talmud would be to the Torah. If we treat the Torah like the Constitution, then the Talmud is sort of like case law. Now, you can agree or disagree with the outcomes of many of what's in said case law, even in constitutional law. For a great example would be that many of us Christians disagree heavily with Roe v. Wade. And we would say that that's an unconstitutional ruling, but it is nonetheless, it's in case law. The Talmud is the same way. There are many things that are going to be in there that you're going to disagree with, but it's like case law in accompaniment to the Constitution. You don't necessarily have to always agree with it. But at least what you're looking at is a window into the ancient world on what the text meant to them when they were reading it, and what kind of conclusions they drew from the different implications that were brought forth before the Sanhedrin. Much of the Talmudic text is based on Sanhedrin rulings. Its compilation begins sometime around 200 CE, and it goes anywhere. I think its completion begins in 500 CE, give or take, is when the Talmud comes to a completed sense. So it's actually it's a very much a living and breathing document that was sort of changing over time or being added to as things come about. Even Rashi's commentary it gets added to the Talmudic texts. If you open up a page of Talmud, you will find Rashi's commentary alongside what's going on in here. Most of Talmud is actually just, again, a lot of commentary on case law. And so there are some stories that are in the Talmud, and they're usually there in order to bring about clarity on a particular case, as an example of why a ruling would be made one way versus another. And so there are some stories. The thing about where a lot of the hate for the Talmud comes is people who don't understand how the Talmud works read bits and pieces of it and pull these kind of things out of context and bring them forth as a part of their argument to say that this is a racist document for X, Y, and Z. And here's a thing from the Talmud that says, here, look, all Gentiles are sons of devils or something basically made up, or that what have you. And you're going to find weird phrases that are in the Talmud like that, but they are doing to the Talmud what Christians blame atheists for doing to much of the Old Testament. And so they're sort of guilty of this double standard where, if an atheist brings forth, Bible says you can sell your daughter into slavery. What they've done, what this particular atheist have done, is taking a verse completely out of its context, took just the words, threw it into a modern context at you as a proof that God is a moral monster. The Christians that hate the Talmud tend to do exactly the same thing with the Talmud. They tend to take bits and pieces and throw it out as part of their proof text, completely removed from the rest of the conversation. So one of these, and there's some other examples too, where apparently Jesus is being talked about in the Talmud. There's actually very little evidence for this. There are some sources that say there is a couple of mentions of Jesus in the Talmud. A lot of sources will contend against that and say, well, actually, Jesus is not in the Talmud at all. So it kind of depends on which scholar you ask. But what you'll find is if you insert, there's a particular passage. It says something like, if you Google it and you don't know anything about Talmud, if you try to Google it, you'll find something like Jesus is boiling in excrement as a Talmudic sentence. And for those of us who are familiar with the works of the Talmud and actually understand how to read it, because there's a correct way to read the Talmud. When people bring this forth, Jesus' name is actually nowhere mentioned in that particular story at all. It's implied later on. It was sort of like an addition to an elucidated version where it was actually a footnote in some translation where it's like, some scholars believe this might be a reference to Jesus. But there's no evidence of that. It's just sort of there, but they've taken that, they've inserted it into translations. They've put his name into it when it's not actually present in the story. And then they pull it again out of its context and trying to throw it at you and say, look, the Talmud is evil. It says Jesus is boiling in excrement, which again, it doesn't actually say that. There is a story in there of somebody boiling in excrement, and that person was risen from the dead by a man named Onkelos, who is actually he wrote his own Targum, and he's a convert, and this is a story about before his conversion, and he raises up three people, and he asks them a different question, and each of them give a different answer, and depending on their answer, they tell you what their punishment was for what they did in their life. And one of them says, I taught, I led Israel into idolatry, and his punishment was boiling in excrement. But there's no mention of Jesus in that story at all. So there's a ton of passages where many of the Talmud haters do this. They try to bring this up. They try to bring Jesus into it. I would actually argue that there might be one particular instance where it could be the Jesus that we know that's in the Talmud. There's a man who's mentioned that he was executed on Passover, but some of the details are weird. It says the number of disciples that he's said to have had is wrong, and there's a few other details within the particular story of this Jesus fellow, which by the way is a super common name. Yeshua is a super common name in first century Israel, and so this is like nothing crazy. It's not impossible to think that there's a different Yeshua who was also executed and he was executed for sorcery on Passover. And also the date is wrong. It's something like 100 and, or 90 or 80 or something. The date in the actual dating of the Talmud is off, and it's too far away that we may as well just leave out the idea of it being the Jesus we know altogether. Some of the details are just not matching up. So there's actually an argument to be had that Jesus isn't in the Talmud. It depends on which scholar you ask. There are plenty of sources. But the hate for the Talmud needs to stop. People need to definitely look into things themselves and ask the source material before drawing their own conclusions that are based without any real methodology to the decision that they've come to. One thing that we can do easily is just ask somebody who does understand how to read the Talmud what is meant in certain passages, and usually they can easily open up to the passage and explain it and help you gain an understanding. But understand that again, it's a conversation. The Talmud is all a conversation. Excuse me, the whiskey doesn't want to stay. So as a result, you are going to see quotes from some rabbis that say one thing, and if you pull that out of context, again, you're going to get this crazy ruling in it. But if you keep reading, in most cases, you'll find that a different rabbi stands up and speaks up against what this first rabbi said in an open disagreement, and then they kind of hash it back and forth. And there are some times where it just gives two different alternating opinions. One will say, this rabbi believes that this is his opinion and this is how it should be done. Another rabbi, he said this is his opinion on how it should be done. This rabbi disagrees with both and says that it shouldn't be done at all. And this one rabbi says it's kind of a mixture between the two. It's a conversation. It's a living and breathing document. You can't just take a verse out of it, which it's not really orchestrated in verses, more like pages and sections of the page. But you can't just take that, read a bit of it, and pull out the part that you don't like. And I think that this needs to stop. Again, the Talmud is actually, it does have a lot of good things to say in it. I believe it's Sanhedrin 58 or 59. So it's page 58 or 59, A or B. A or B is front or back. And it says something like, in one verse just before it, a rabbi says any Gentile who tries to study Torah is basically damned to hell for the rest of his eternity, or something. It's very not good. But the very next section after that, on the next page, it says that a Gentile who studies Torah is equal to the high priest. Right? And these are just differing opinions between different rabbis. Some rabbis were very anti-Gentile inclusion. Other rabbis were very pro-Gentile inclusion. So it just depends. You can't, with a piece of volume being 73 volumes long, I know it's difficult to just say stick around and read the rest of it in order to gain a better sense of what's going on in the conversation. I understand that's difficult, but you can't just take what you see at face value, especially if all you did was Google Talmud bad, right? And then you got a list of 17 phrases from the Talmud that are bad. That's not research. And same if you try to do Talmud good, you'll actually primarily find some stuff where Talmud is bad, right? Because that's the predominant theory. But trying to clear the air here and now, most people don't understand the Talmud at all. It is primarily a conversation between many rabbis happening over hundreds of years, and they're trying to discuss and clarify case law on things like the Mishnah and the Gemara. Mishnah and Gemara are generally considered the oral Torah. And so it's kind of trying to elaborate or expound on parts of Mishnah and Gemara that seem confusing or maybe aren't so clear, or maybe it seems clear, but it's not actually clear. And then the Talmud quotes bits and pieces from the actual texts of Scripture themselves, and further elaborates on the meanings of some of these things. And one really good example, I think it's Sanhedrin 98. 98A or B. Again, I can't remember which one. But for those that you might commonly be told that Isaiah 53 is not a messianic passage. Well, if you favor the Talmud instead of brush it immediately off as something that it's anti, it's only for the Jews and it's racist and whatever. If you brush it off, you would know that, as in Sanhedrin 98, it explicitly says that it's the opinion of many of the rabbis that Isaiah 53 is in fact a messianic passage. And so, that's a case in which it can very much help your case, because it's Rashi who says it's not a messianic passage. And Rashi lived 500 years after the Talmud is completed in its compilation. And so Rashi tends to redact certain things because he was forced in a position where he had to debate with Catholics. And so sometimes he would have that problem of trying to find a way around it as to not concede the point to the Catholics. And he was writing under duress. So we don't fault him for that at all. There are times where he was definitely doing that. But that is a case where you can show that this was at one point some school of thought's opinion on this matter, and it predates Rashi's primary. He's the primary commentator for a lot of modern Jewish thought, and so you can point to how something predates him as a school of thought that does exist. So you open up the possibility of certain things. And there's a lot. Zechariah 12, Zechariah 9 are two other passages that are brought up in Sanhedrin 98 as being definitively messianic passages, particularly with Messiah, son of David, Mashiach ben David. And then the idea of the two messiahs are also expounded upon in Talmudic literature, where you have the Messiah ben Yosef versus Messiah ben David. There's even a portion that somewhere in the Talmud, I believe it's one school of thought that says that Isaiah 53 is one half Messiah ben Yosef and the other half Messiah ben David, or Isaiah 65 might be that one. But either way, if you understand how to use the document, if you understand how to read it, and don't just brush it off as a hate document, it could be of benefit, and it is of benefit. Again, I don't think you could possibly translate an English translation of the Tanakh at all without the help of the oral traditions. Every single jot and tittle and every tiny little vowel point that you see in the Masoretic texts in many of your interlinear Bibles are based entirely out of the Talmudic literature. It's only because of the Talmudic literature that we have the Nikud to begin with. And so you have the Talmud to thank for having an English translation that's in any way comprehensible, because without it, you would have a basically incomprehensible text. I've heard it said by one Jew before that you don't translate the Torah, you interpret the Torah. It's impossible to translate, so you have to you interpret it instead. And I think that's very much true. There's a lot of truth behind the way the Hebrew works. There's a lot of truth to that. You can't really just do a translation. It's all interpretive. And that's really true with any two languages. When you try to go from one language to another, that's why we call them interpreters, right? When I did some, when I was doing my time in the Marine Corps, we were very careful to call our translator an interpreter. And he was the go-between for two completely different cultures. Us to them, and he was called an interpreter for that reason, because certain things just don't translate from the way we say them, but the way we mean them, he has to translate it into a way that makes sense to the way it means to them, and so he has to make interpretive decisions. And that's essentially what you're doing when it comes to any of the Hebrew texts, is you're interpreting, and you're doing your best to interpret. So that's kind of how it works. I think I'm at like 28 minutes. It's kind of like it's kind of my rant, I guess. I'll get off my soapbox here for a little bit then, and basically say that I can't stand this baseless hate for a document very few people understand. And so let's go to the comments. Let's see what we got questions wise, and feel free to drop a question in the below in the chat, wherever the chat is. I don't know how this how the layout looks. But go ahead and drop it in there, and let's have some back and forth. Let's see. Bavli had more rabbis involved than Yerushalmi. Yes, a lot of people don't know this. I'm glad you brought this up. A lot of people don't know that there are two different Talmuds. And so a fun thing to do also is when people are like, oh, the Talmud is evil. And I'm like, okay, well, which one? Did you not know there were two? Aha, so you're uninformed. Okay, good to go. It helps to pull them away from their high horse that they got on without really knowing what they were talking about to begin with. But yes, there are two different Talmuds, and they were not contrary to popular belief. So Bavli means the Babylonian Talmud. Yerushalmi means the Jerusalem Talmud. The Bavli Talmud was not compiled in Babylon. The name, I know the name seems to suggest that that's not actually true. It's called that because it was a Talmud written in exile. And the Yerushalmi, I believe the same thing. It was not actually written or compiled in Jerusalem, but it was compiled within the land of Israel. And so it was not written in exile. And so there's basically an exilic, I think that's a word, exilic. There's a Talmud that was written in exile, and there's a Talmud that wasn't. And one is considered more authoritative than the other. The Babylonian is considered more authoritative because it was more carefully written, because it was written in exile, so they had to be a lot more careful, a lot more exacting, whereas the Talmud Jerusalem was less careful. Being engrossed in its own culture, there's a lot of presuppositions that take place in the Jerusalem Talmud. So it doesn't clarify on these presuppositions because it assumes the reader already knows a bunch of this stuff, and so less care was taken on it, and so that it's considered less authoritative. But there is I can't remember the rabbi's name, but he did say something along the lines of when the Mashiach comes, people will lean towards the Jerusalem Talmud. I cannot remember who said that, but I do know that that's a thought process, that as people lean away from Babylonian Talmud and into the Jerusalem Talmud, that's like a sign of Mashiach coming, or that he has come. It kind of depends what you take from there. Semper Fi. I got a couple of people in the chat that are bots. Got to take care of those. Let's see. Hey, if you want, I'd love to know more about Tanya and how, if it does, relates to the Talmud. Okay, so the Tanya is a document that was compiled by Shneur Zalman of Liadi, or otherwise known as the Alter Rebbe, and that's a 17th century document, I believe. It's a much later compilation, and it doesn't have a whole lot in relation to Talmud. There's a little bit of crossover, but not a whole lot. The Talmud is not really super worried about your spiritual health and well-being on an extraplanar level, as far as like Kabbalistic concepts and all that. The Talmud is not super trying to deal with any of that. It's much more practical. And the Tanya is trying to deal with this extra spiritual realm, this extra dimensional being that makes up your soul, or souls, plural, and the 10 Sephirot that go along with all of this. It's where the acronym Chabad comes from, Chokhmah Bina Da'at, which is the acronym Chabad, Chokhmah Bina Da'at, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, excuse me. And so there's not a whole lot of crossover there. The Tanya is a very different document from the Talmud. Very good document, though, and it's essentially the primary document of Hasidic Judaism. It's kind of their catechism, for lack of a better comparison. Let's see. What do you think of the proposal that Yeshua has had the curses pronounced on him as is the sorcerer? Okay, from Acts. What do you think of the proposal that the Yeshu that has the curses pronounced on him is the sorcerer bar Jesus from Acts? I'm actually not familiar with that proposal, unless you're talking about the Yeshu from the Talmudic recollection that there was a Yeshu, a Jesus, that was executed on Passover for being at the charge of sorcery. And I think I did cover that a little earlier part of the episode. I did cover how that some of the details of this particular Yeshu is in they don't line up the same. The number of disciples is wrong. The date that it happens is very off by like 30 or 40 years off, not just a couple of years. And so there's a lot of stuff going on here, where some people think maybe the dating and the disciples numbers are wrong, but it's definitely our guy. It's just because it's a multiply attested document. None of the details are going to always line up the same. Other scholars disagree entirely, and they're like, nah, it can't be the same guy. There's too much detail that that doesn't line up at all. So there's no way. Just kind of depends. So that's, yeah. Do I have a Dafiomi? Yes, I do. So this is a Dafiomi, Bavli, Talmud Bavli. This is a Babylonian Talmud. Dafiomi it's just a smaller version. In fact, I also have a full size Talmud Bavli. So for comparison, you guys can see this is the Dafiomi and this is the full size right there for you. They both, this one has the nice print, and this is just a regular like book print. But these are essentially, and I think this is actually the same exact tractate. Yeah, it's actually the same exact. They're both tractate Shabbat, and the page numbers are exactly the same, and the content's all exactly the same. One's just bigger than the other. So, and I love this. I have 2 volumes of tractate Shabbat and 1 volume of Berachot, I believe. Yes. As I read one and finish it, I buy another one. And so I've only got a few volumes with the hopes of one day having the full 73 volume set. But it's a lot. There's a lot here. And of course, even in just this 1 volume, the writing is incredibly small, as you can see. And so, it's a small book with a lot of pages and a ton of reading. For those of you wondering, that's what a page of the Talmud looks like. Excuse me, this one here. In the middle is going to be your Mishnah and Gemara. On the outsides is going to be like your different commentators. You got Rashi on this side. I believe this is where's Radak? There's Tosafos. Much of it is actually written in Rashi script, funny enough. But yeah, that's essentially what a page of the Talmud looks like. Wants to borrow your library. These books, I mean, if you want to come down this way and borrow a volume or 2, please give it back. But you are welcome. And I'll be buying a few more volumes here in the near future. Who wrote the Mishnah Torah, and how many volumes are there? Okay, so a good question. The Mishnah Torah depends on who you ask. So like the Mishnah is a different volume. It's a different work entirely from the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah was written by Maimonides, or the Rambam, and he was the Sultan's physician, and he lived at the height of the Sephardic Golden Age. Essentially, is considered one of the best philosophers in Jewish thought. He wrote the book A Guide for the Perplexed. For those of you who have not checked that book out, it's basically free. It's you can get it. It's in the public domain. You can read it on Safaria. You can even, if you have like a Kindle or a Nook, there's a free version of it that you can get. You can get it on an app. It's basically distributed everywhere. But it's a philosophy. It's a very good book. It's a little hard to follow. You might need a little bit of explanation or background, but yes. So Maimonides is an important figure. He wrote the Mishnah Torah, and he did so from memory. And that's a different bit of thing entirely from the Mishnah, which is a compilation that was likely completed in around about 200. The beginning of the compilation of the Mishnah begins in 60 AD, and it's completed in 200. And so it is also, like the Talmud, a compilation that happened over time. And then there's a Tosefta, I believe it is, which is sort of an addition to the Mishnah. It's sort of bits and pieces that were maybe left out, not because they were forgotten, but because of presuppositions that weren't clarified, that needed to be clarified, because not everyone had those presuppositions. And so that the Tosefta sort of comes back and provides a little bit of further clarity. But yeah, so there's a lot when it comes to ancient Jewish literature. There's a lot, and they have been working on trying to interpret the Torah and the prophets and the writings for thousands of years, and they've collected all of this knowledge, working knowledge for thousands of years, into a ton of different literatures that are well known and that are studied to this day. And one last thing before I guess we're done with questions. How much is your bookshelf worth these days? That's a great question. Let me get back to that. But a lot of what we know about the first century as well is contained in the Talmud. Rabban Gamliel, who was Paul's rabbi, by the way, he is a very famous figure in the Talmud. And so that we know a lot about Paul's rabbi from the Talmud, and we know nothing about Paul's rabbi from the New Testament because he's mentioned, but then he's never mentioned again. His name is dropped like once or twice. Twice, actually. Paul drops his name once, and then the name is dropped again in Acts. And that's it. And so the text presumes that you know who this guy is. He's an incredibly important figure. He's the first ever to be given the title Rabban, which means our master, or Rabbeinu. Master, headmaster. So technically, Rabbeinu is actually what it would mean. Rabban, but Rabban is like that's no joke. It's higher than rabbi for sure. Rabban. So he is a very respected figure. So for Paul to name drop Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel, and for him to show up as well in Acts is a big deal. And many people have no idea who this person is. Many Christians have no idea who this person is. So reading through the Talmud will give you an idea of the kind of person that Rabban Gamliel was. Is John the Baptist or Paul talked about in the Talmud? I don't believe they come up. Not that I'm aware. If they are brought up, it's in a place that I'm not yet aware. I haven't read the entire thing. I've only read maybe 30% of it. I happened to read a lot of it while I was in college, as I had access to a full set at the time. But since then, I just have what I have when I have time to read. And then how much is my bookshelf worth? I meant to get to this question. Man, I don't know. Everything that's behind me is not everything I have. Every book that I have not finished reading is in a completely different bookshelf. So this is everything that I have read that is behind me. If I had to put a number on it, I would say easily, probably $3,000 or $4,000. That's maybe underselling it. Each of these 6 volume set pieces here are 300 a piece. So that's 900 already. So we're already at 12, 18, right, just off the bat. And then we haven't even gotten to the Or Chaim and all the other commentaries and the entire Midrash Rabbah I have as well. Yeah, probably close to 5,000, maybe. I don't know. I'm not exactly counting or keeping track. I probably should, just in case. I try. This is your tie from your wedding, by the way. And Rabban, more than rabbi, it's master. It's like master teacher versus just teacher. And so head teacher. He's the first to receive that title in the Talmud. There are a few that come after him that get the title, but he's the most famous one to receive it. He's actually, Rabban Gamliel is the one who instituted the 3 daily prayers, the Shemona Esrei, that Peter was praying these 3 daily prayers on the roof when he receives his vision of the sheet. And so it's very likely that the prayers that are contained in a modern Siddur, minus a few exceptions, are the same prayers that the disciples were praying that were instituted by Gamliel himself. And so that's just another little interesting bit of historical no for you. And I have not been to Jerusalem yet. It is also on my bucket list for insurance purposes. Yeah, I need to get this accounted for with an accurate number for just in case, Chas v'sholom, heaven forbid, anything happens. But that being said, all right, 45 minutes. I think it's a short episode. Good enough. Questions are calming down. So we're about to go into the after party. I will be in the after party, for those of you wondering. And that is for Patreon members. So if you want to become a member, membership starts at $1, and you can join us in the after party on the Discord. Discord is right there. Feel free to join up as a regular member of the Discord anyway, regardless of whether or not you're a Patreon supporter, doesn't matter. Join us in the Discord, have conversations. We've got a very wide variety of beliefs in the Discord, so you can ask and get really good answers, scholarship answers, common person's thoughts on certain ideas. It's a good place to be. Come hang out. Sometimes we're in the regular voice chat, and you can come and hang out. But definitely for the Patreon supporters who are going to be joining us in the after party, that's an exclusive thing that you guys have access to that we'll be doing after this show still. Even though, again, it's just me, not Brad, but still, I'm going to hang out with you guys. I like hanging out with you guys. I look forward to this every week. Once again, really appreciate all your guys' support. And I see a couple more questions here. Oh, so did the disciples of Yeshua call him Ramban? Also, I asked because in one of my translations it says master. Interesting. Maybe. The Greek might not give you an idea of what was being said in either Aramaic or Hebrew. It's possible. It's possible that he was given that title and that the disciples referred to him that as well. Because it's a hierarchy thing. Anyone who earned the title deserves to be called by the title that they earned. And this is definitely true of any of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were always called rabbi because they earned that title. And so it is likely, as a member of the Sanhedrin, that he might have been called either rabbi or rabban. It may depend. But if he was given rabban while he was alive with the disciples alongside them, it's very possible that the disciples did, in fact, refer to him as rabban. So a case can be made. What is my favorite case in the Talmud and why? That I need to think on that one. Case. So a lot of it is sort of a different kind of case. Like carrying on Shabbat and what constitutes a domain, right? And the different classes of domain and how to set up an Eruv in order to not be carrying on Shabbat because you're within a class 2 domain. And so some of it it's very dry reading. It's very case law. I don't think I necessarily have a favorite case, just cases that I'm more familiar with. So I wish I could give you a better answer than that, but I'm not sure I have a favorite case. It's a very dry document. Last question, and this will be the last one. First Chronicles 12:18. Is it the Ruach Elohim, Shekhinah that took control of Amasal? Let's pull that one open. First Chronicles. Where you at? 12:18. Let's see here. Well, first of all, 12:18 doesn't exist in the Hebrew version. It goes into the 13th chapter by verse 16. Unless I'm I'm in Second Chronicles. No wonder. 12:18 First Chronicles. David went out to meet them and answered them, saying, "If you come to me in peace to support me, then my heart will be united with you. But if it is to betray me to my adversaries, then my hands have done no wrong. Then may the God of our fathers take notice and judge." Then the Spirit, so verse 19, came upon Amasai, leader of 30. "We are yours, David, on your side, son of Jesse. Shalom, shalom to you, and shalom to him who helps you, for your God supports you." Okay, let's pull up the Hebrew in that one. It probably mine actually says, so usually my translation is pretty good about rendering it Ruach, if it's Ruach, so it may not be Ruach. So let's do this. Let's pull up my barber software. First. All right. Let's see what the Hebrew has to say. It is ruach. Interesting. Yeah, okay. So the ruach. So that requires further study, I believe. I do not have an answer for you right away on that one. That one is going to, I have to take a look at that one. Because I don't want to give you the wrong answer. and there's multiple implications just from the word ruach that can be drawn. And so I need to consult the proper authorities on its particular exegesis. That's what I'll say. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that one. My initial thought, I'll give you my initial thought, but don't take this as an answer. I'll just give you my initial thought is it's very likely, I don't like to use the term Holy Spirit because that is a pretty much New Testament specific way of referring to it. But Ruach is another way to do it as well. And so it's not often, like you'll never find the phrase Holy Spirit in the Tanakh. It's just not a phrase that's used in Hebrew. If you do see it in Hebrew, the way the sentence structure is usually done in Hebrew is I believe it's verb, object, subject. And so you would see Spirit of holiness rather than the Holy Spirit. And so it's not likely you'll find the phrase Holy Spirit. It's very much a Greek rendition of the way that would normally appear. So, but you could say that this is like the spirit, like of prophecy, or even like the angel, or an angel, like some godly spirit. Yes, bow ties are cool. Spirit of prophecy. Ruach does typically tend to refer to the breath. Ruach means breath, right? So it could very well be the breath of God speaking through him in this moment. That's my initial thoughts, not my final answer. I will have to get back to you on that one. Okay. Gonna go ahead and call it there. So this is Seamus Does a Rant. Thanks for joining us once again, and please keep Brad in your prayers. He was unable to join us tonight. Some things have come up, and so please keep him in mind. Yes, yeah, and it's 30% off right now. So if you got like $1,900, then you can afford it. But yeah. So once again, thank you guys for all your support. Thank you to the Patreon supporters at every level, every single dollar. We really appreciate. Thank you so much. So here's the shout out again to our top tier supporters. You guys rock. We got some new names on this list, and I will see all of you patrons, whatever. Oh, that's with the discount. Goodness. So I will see you guys in the after party chat. So once again, everybody have a good night. This is not I forgot how smoky this was. I think that's it. I hate when the music cuts off since it's just so quiet. All right. I'll see you guys after. Thanks for joining us, and l'chaim.